Welcome to one of the other variations of the Natalie dress. In this particular video we are going to insert a gathered ribbon and the Babyville snap fastening. We're going to bind the seams with ready-made bias tape, and also we're doing the ruffle hem and the Megan pocket. The settings for your printer would have to be actual size and borderless, and we're cutting the solid line for this particular pattern. The test scale should measure 5 centimeters exactly. You will need the back fastening. You will also need 2 shoulder straps. Then we've got the bodice, which I cut twice, a white lining and the outside. The skirt, of course. The Megan pockets, which I've also interlined with white so that the pink doesn't show through when you're sewing it. You've got 2 hem trims. I've got a pink linen here and a rather big tie and sash for the front, which again I would interline but not so thick as I've done it here, a bit too thick, that stuff. So lighter white cotton or some iron-on interfacing will do to create this beautiful bow sash in the front. You've got a center of the bow as well, and then we've got the tie backs, and you can see they're quite wide, but we're halving them so they're not really that wide, but I think they look very cute. I've also got this ruffle ribbon. It's already done. It's also stretchy, but I'm not using the stretchy part of it. I just thought it was really pretty. So we're going to insert that into the shoulder straps and at the hem of the dress. We begin by making the bodice. So here are your bodice pieces. So you want to put the lining over the top. And then with right sides facing, we pin the armhole and we sew the armhole with a centimeter seam allowance. Make sure that you have the needle down if you are turning your fabric. Take it very steady and keep lining up your edge of your fabric with the 1 centimeter seam allowance. Cut back your seam allowance to about 3 to 4 millimeters. No need to snip this. Usually this holds it in quite nicely, so it doesn't become bigger, the armhole, so don't snip it. Iron the seam out. You could let a little bit of the white peep out, or you can do it exactly fitting. I wouldn't understitch this, to be honest, because it makes it harder to insert the shoulder straps if it's understitched, so leave understitching out in this instance. Now we're going to do the shoulder strap. So get yourself your gathered ribbon, it could be any ribbon really, and your shoulder strap. Iron it in half, iron the sides towards the middle, and then iron one over slightly shorter than the other. And you can see that here. It's just a couple of millimeters over. And we're going to put the ribbon inside like this. What you want to do is you want to put the ribbon with the right side facing a centimeter up from where it needs to be, directly onto that crease that you've ironed in, and then stitch this on. Keep lining it up so the edge of where the ribbon starts, it's exactly on that crease. Try not to stretch it if you've got a stretchy one. Having said that, on the shoulder strap, actually it's quite nice to have it a little bit stretchy, so it's a bit more comfy to wear, but it doesn't have to be. Then turn your ribbon over so it runs out exactly a centimeter above. Secure, and we can now put the other side over the top. You could pin this, of course, or you could iron it first, but it's not really necessary. And there you go, from both sides, because one of them was wider than the other, it has caught both sides. Now we're going to insert the shoulder straps into the bodice. So put your bodice the right side facing up and sew the straps, and then just whoosh the straps over so that you can now pin them onto your bodice. Make sure that they are directly in the edge, a centimeter down from the top, so that there isn't an ugly gap when you're finished like that. Move it over so it fits right into the corner. I would use 2 pins because it's really easy for this to slip and then they go in a little bit screw width, and we don't want that. Now you can turn it inside out and you have sandwiched in your straps between the 2 layers, and we're just sewing straight across with a centimeter seam allowance. I've done that here, so all I need to do now is remove my pins, pull it out, give it a press, and I can proceed with putting the back straps in as well. So pull it out nicely, put it right sides up again, and then put the back on exactly how you would have it, and then just whoosh that one over so you're not twisting it, and again you move it into the corner, right into the corner, use 2 pins to attach it, and then we can roll over the lining and it's sandwiched in between, and we sew across the top again. Now this is done. All I need to do is press this and I'm ready for my next step. We're going to do the bow sash and the ties. The ties are going to be just folded over in half and sewn together. And if you have very light fabric, maybe you want to use a really see-through organza. What I would do if I was you is to take some starch and starch the whole lot. I've done that here because my linen is actually really flimsy. It's very fine, it's lovely stuff. And then it's really easy to work with. And I've got my sash here, so it's lined, so you could use the iron-on interfacing. Just fold it over and edge to edge, pin it and then sew it across. And we do the same with the center of the bow, centimeter seam allowance. You could give less of a seam allowance and have it wider. That's a matter of taste really. And then when you sew your ties, just make sure you use a small seam and then have the needle down when you turn your fabric. And as you get to the point, you want to round it off and go backwards and forwards. Try not to have a really pointy tip, because actually that will not give you a nice point. It's exactly the other way around. If you do it slightly round, you get a pointy tip. So turn your sash inside out and your ties, and then wiggle the seam out like this and iron it into place. We are now turning our center of the bow through with the ruler loop turner. So you want to push that through and then hook it into the end of the fabric like this, shut it, and then holding on to that, just pull, and you've got the center of the bow. Now I want the seams to lie flat so that the actual seam is in the center back, and so I use the ruler loop turner for that. Then very gently iron the sash apart as well, so not the sides because we don't want a crease in there, just the center, and we can turn that inside out as well, and then give it a good press again. Bunch up the center of the bow and just sew over it. That makes it a bit easier. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I thought that was better. Your center of the bow should be 3 inches. That's about 7 centimeters in length. You could make it 8 actually, because we're going to put a second bow through. Fold it over, sew it together, and then we want to turn the seam to the inside, and we can slide this little center over the bow. And I'll spare you me trying to get it over. It took me quite a while. So, okay, I finally did it and it looked really nice. So that one's done. Next, we want to apply the bias tape to the seams. So I've got a ready-made bias tape here, which hasn't been ironed through the center. So when I iron it, I make sure, again, one is like 1 millimeter shorter than the other, so that when I sew it, the wider part is at the bottom and it definitely will catch. So quite close to the edge, about 1 or 2 millimeters off. I would also recommend that your stitch length is a bit longer so it doesn't look so homemade. The smaller the stitch length, that's the rule really, the more homemade it looks. So top stitching should always be a bit bigger, maybe stitch length 3. Iron them out really well. I think the key to everything is to iron every step in between, and then put gather threads in the front and the back, 2 lines with the biggest stitch that you can have on your machine. Now we're going to do the Megan pockets, and they're really easy. They're basically a matter of putting them on top of each other, turning inside out. I'm using the white interlining just so that the white is really shiny and comes through. And you sew all the way around with the turning gap here on one of the straight parts of the seam. And I'm also using a smaller stitch again because I don't want this to fray, and I want my round to look really good because I am going to cut this back pretty vigorously, and if the stitch length is too big it'll fray and it'll come apart. Cut back your seam allowances, so you can see it here, it's fairly close, sort of 3 millimeters maybe, and then leave the seam allowance where you turn it because it makes it harder to press if you cut that back too. So then turn your pocket from the furthest point, and then we want to iron over the top of the pocket. And if you watched closely, I've actually changed my mind halfway through. First I thought I have a pink pocket with sort of like the patterned printed flap, but I decided against that in the end, so I did it the other way around. And then to do the second pocket, just put that on top of the first pocket and iron it exactly the same way. That way you've got 2 identical pockets. Select the triple stitch on your machine. It's usually with the 3 lines. That might be in a different place on your sewing machine, but definitely look for 3 lines. And then the stitch goes forwards, backwards, forwards, which makes it thicker, and I think that makes it look like an embroidery thread. I use this an awful lot. If you watched other videos of mine, then you'll notice that this is one of my favorite things to do. And we just go along the top edge where the pocket is folded over, and at this point you could put it actually onto the front of the skirt, but I didn't do that. Now we're going to attach the skirt to the main bodice, and the bodice needs to be halved so you know where the center is. Then I would fold the lining out as well so it's not visible, and we can now put our front of the skirt on top, right sides facing, and that is the one that has got the gather threads in that side. And you want to mark the center, and then you gently pull the top of the gather threads, only the 2 top threads, otherwise it locks the stitching in, and attach that to the side. And when it's just about the right amount of pull, you can just give it a tuck, and then you secure that and you distribute your gathers and you pin them in. Now you do the same on the other side. The only difference at the back is that, of course, you also secure the one side already, because otherwise the threads will pull straight back out on the other side, which is not very good. So give that a tuck as well. Secure your thread, just wiggle it around that vertical needle, and then distribute your gathers in the center of the bodice. And I've done that here, and all I need to do now is to sew it in. I sew a centimeter seam allowance again, which now should be right in the center of your gather stitches, and you can arrange the gathers a little bit more with a pin. I always do that, so I don't necessarily, when I first pin it, do it like perfect, but I do it on the sewing machine. As long as they're in just about right, it's okay, really. You notice also that here we've got the seam to the inside, and on the other basic dress I've actually done it the other way around. The seam is to the outside, so don't get confused. It's just 2 different methods of doing it. Now remove your gather threads, and we're now going to put on the pocket. Like I said, you could have done that earlier. I simply forgot and thought, oh no, pockets still need to be done. 6 inches up and about 1.5 inches from the side. It's just about right. You can do it in a different height. It's up to you really, it's taste. And then pin them on, pin the other one face down, and then move your other side of the fabric over. And of course when you pin this in, it's going to be in just the right position. So pin through the back, and you can lift the fabric up a little bit so you can get in there. There you go. Move it back out. And it's done. Now we want to triple stitch all the way around the outside. And it should look like this when it's done. Could put a button on it if you like. Inserting the sash into the side seam. Now this is really quite an easy thing to do. All you have to do is 1 centimeter up, you put the sash on, and then that's it basically. All we have to do now is put the ties in exactly the same place, put the pins through again, and then we can do the side seam. And again, we've got the centimeter seam allowance for that, so just put the front and the back on top of each other, and you're sewing right from the lining through to the shell part of the bodice, and then of course the skirt. So you do it in one go, and make sure that you mark where the bodice, shell bodice actually starts, so that it looks really good when it's turned. So centimeter seam allowance. I've done that now. The only thing I forgot was, yes, of course, that one isn't clean, so I had to zigzag that. That's the only zigzagging I'm doing on this dress. So now we can turn in that bodice and pin it, or you could do what I've done to finish the bodice lining, and that is to bind it and all the way around, and then have it standing down instead of tucking it in. But of course you can tuck it in, so just demonstrating that here. Turn it in and hand stitch it from that side, or machine stitch it from the outside. It's all possible. I'm going to stitch this through right between the bodice and the skirt so that it literally disappears, and that's a really good way of doing it. But of course, if you end up on the actual bodice and that isn't how you want to work, then just do it from the inside and hand stitch it. Next we're going to do the back fastening, and I just really love this type of fastening because it's very quick and fairly easy once you know how it's done. So 1 centimeter from either side and then towards the middle. You put that fastening underneath the center back, and you need to let this run to the tip into the 1 centimeter seam, so you can see it here quite clearly. So you've got about 2 millimeters showing. There, see it running in, and at the tip there you want either reduce your stitch length or you go backwards and forwards so it's cased in really well. So I think I'm going backwards and forwards here. That's my trick, I think. Yep, that's it. Needle down and then just turn the fabric and let it run back into the 1 centimeter side seam. Really take your time with this, but it's so easy. Once that is in, it's in, and the poppers are so fast. I really like them. I'm using Babyville poppers, and you will see. I bought mine from Joann's when I was on holiday in America, and I'm totally addicted to them. I could use them on everything. So now you want to fold back the seam allowance here. So they are actually, the creases are sitting right next to each other. You can see it here, and then just sew across there. Cut back your seam allowance, maybe not quite as rigorously as I did it here. I don't know why I did it so short. So 1 centimeter seam allowance would be much better. And then you fold the seam allowance over that little seam, and then just tuck it in and move out the corner there. And we are just now moving the top over of our fastening, and we just stitch it down as close as you can to the edge. That's really quite important. And of course you want to really cover that bit at the bottom there. And you can see, you know, you need to take your time until you've got it just right. Good idea also not to sew into your finger. Don't laugh, I've done that a few times myself. and then go all the way up. Next, we want to put them both on top of each other and sew a triangle into the bottom of the fastening, and what that does, it's actually going to make it sit even securer. Fold the left side back, and with 2.5, the measurement, or that's the edge basically of where your fastening ends, we want to sew down just to give it a little bit more firmness for when we put the poppers in a minute, because otherwise that might shimmy and move and then you have trouble putting the poppers in. Now we're ready to insert them. And like I said, I'm using the baby wool ones, which come with this gadget here, which you can see there. It's like this really pokey thing that you can put through. So first of all, put a dot at the top and the bottom where you want your poppers to go. And it's very important they are not in your seam allowance, because if it's too thick, it won't go through. So it needs to be fairly flat. You can go through 4 layers, but not 6. That's basically it. And each popper has got 4 parts to it, one which goes on the top and the bottom, and then 2 which snap into each other. And the one that goes on the lower part is the one with a wide rim. So I pick up both layers so they're exactly in the right position on top of each other, how you want it, and poke through all the way to the other side. Then I take the flat part of the popper and I pop that through, and I put that one with the wide edges over the top, and that little piece of pointy bit that comes out, that is actually going to be squashed down now and holds the popper in place. So you can see that if there isn't enough coming out the top, obviously the popper won't work. So not too thick, but I have 4 layers here and it worked absolutely fine. So move it out again. Work out the little tip again so it comes out, and then we're going to put the one on which has this narrow rim which will fit into the wider rim, and again we press that down and it flattens that little tip again, and we can just do it up. It's really important to have the first popper in and closed before you put the second one on, so you can now put it in the right position and then wiggle through again from the top. And anyone that looks really closely, where's my popper going? It's not in the middle, is it? Anyway, it's just that's the thing, isn't it? Concentrate on the camera, not so much on the measurement there. Anyway, so you put the lower part through again, and then you do the same for the top, and then finally, of course, the lowest button. Again, you go through all the layers, put it on, and we've got 3 poppers. Finally, we want to do the hem trim and the ruffle. So the hem trim needs closing either side with a centimeter seam allowance. Iron the seam apart, nice and flat, and then it's a tapered hem, so where it's wider, that's the lower part of it, that's the hem part. I'm going to put my ribbon on, and the ribbon goes on, if there was a right side to it, right side's facing down directly onto the hem trim. And when I've sewn this on, I can go back and turn my dress inside out, and then side seam on side seam. I'm actually putting, if you look really closely now, you can see it, I'm putting a seam on top of a seam to put it in, and we're working from the inside, and then the whole lot rolls to the outside and is in perfect position. And we're going to stitch this in exactly the same stitching line that we've just done. That makes it a lot easier and it'll work really well. I've done this now, so the final part here is to now position the hem trim on the outside. So turn your dress so you've got it right sides on the outside again. Normally I'd iron the seam apart, but because my hem trim is really small, I didn't want to do that on this occasion, so I just fold it up like that, and then because it's really see-through, I tacked it in a lot more than I normally would. It would be a centimeter, but on this one I'd actually turned it in all the way, like you can see me do here, and then up, and that way it almost has 2 layers and the roses don't shine through. So you want to pin this all the way around, and then we're going to top stitch it close to the edge. And now I'm creating a second layer, which means I'm going up 3 inches from the ruffle, and I'm ironing all that, and then I'm going to top stitch another 2.5 centimeters, that's like 1 inch from the top, and I top stitch all that through. And then I've created a layer here that can roll down, and it will actually cover your top stitching, so it makes it look very professional. It's dead easy to do, and it looks like a 3-layer hem. Finally, I'm going to make an extra bow for my sash. So you take the bow pattern. There's 2 bow patterns in the pack. One is a big one, one's a small one. This is the big one. And we want to fold it over and then stitch it shut, leaving a gap. And I've done that here, so there you can see that's what it was that I've sewn shut, and there's the gap. And then I'm going to sew across the sides and turn my bow inside out. It's really simple, this, and then all I have to do is basically ruffle it up through the center and I get my bow shape. So now I just want to wiggle that bow through the existing bow, which is also not going to be shown because it takes forever to fit it through, but once it's done, it's done. It's not going to come out, and also I wouldn't really firmly attach it because A, it's not going to go anywhere, and B, for ironing purposes, it'll be quite nice if you could just slip it back out, wouldn't it? So I wouldn't attach this necessarily, just leave it loose. You could also put some buttons on the top to make it all a bit over the top. I've put the buttons here on the pockets because I think that's really nice. So this is the classic Natalie dress. If you want to know more about the pattern, ins and outs, introduction, etc., then go to the projects page on frocksandfrolics.com, and thank you very much for watching.